Close your eyes and imagine standing at the very threshold of human memory. You're gazing across a landscape of dust and possibility, where the first cities rose from primordial mud and humanity took its earliest faltering steps towards civilization. But what if those steps were not entirely our own? What if the hands that guided us, the voices that taught us, the beings who shaped our destiny were not gods born of myth and metaphor, but something far more tangible, far more unsettling? What if we inherited a world that was never truly meant for us? This is not just the story of ancient aliens or cosmic visitors. This is something deeper, something that touches the very essence of what it means to be human. It is the story of the Anunnaki, the mysterious beings who, according to some of the oldest written texts on Earth, came from the heavens and created us. Not out of love, but out of necessity. Not as children, but as servants. And when they left, when they vanished into the shadows of history and legend, they left behind more than ruins and tablets. They left behind a legacy, a framework, a world built to their specifications, a world we still inhabit today. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself and let's dive in. The story begins in a place that most people have never heard of, though its influence echoes through every aspect of modern life. Southern Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a region that corresponds to modern-day Iraq and parts of Syria. This is where, around 6,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened, something that would change the course of human history forever. The Sumerians appeared. To say they appeared is not an exaggeration. Unlike other ancient civilizations that we can trace through slow, gradual development from hunter-gatherer bands to settled agricultural communities to complex societies, the Sumerians seem to emerge almost fully formed. One moment the archaeological record shows scattered villages of simple farmers. The next, we see sophisticated city-states with monumental architecture, complex bureaucracies, advanced mathematics, and the world's first known writing system. The jump is staggering. It is as if someone pressed fast forward on human development, compressing thousands of years of gradual progress into a few generations of explosive innovation. The mainstream explanation is that the unique geography of Mesopotamia, with its fertile soil enriched by annual flooding, its abundance of clay for bricks, and its position at the crossroads of trade routes, created ideal conditions for rapid cultural advancement. The Sumerians, according to this view, were simply the right people in the right place at the right time. But when you examine what they actually achieved, when you look at the sophistication of their culture, their knowledge, their art, you cannot help but ask, where did it all come from? Consider their writing system, cuneiform, did not evolve from simple pictographs over centuries as Egyptian hieroglyphs did. It appeared suddenly around 3200 BCE, already capable of expressing complex ideas, recording legal contracts, documenting astronomical observations, and preserving literature. Within a few hundred years, the Sumerians were producing administrative documents of stunning complexity, tracking goods and labour across vast distances with meticulous precision. They invented the concept of the receipt, the contract, the promissory note. They created bureaucracy itself. Their mathematics were equally remarkable. They used a sexagesimal or base 60 counting system, which is why we still divide our hours into 60 minutes and our circles into 3 times 60 degrees. This is not a simple or intuitive system. It requires abstract thinking, an understanding of fractions and ratios that should not exist in a culture barely removed from the Stone Age. And yet there it was, fully functional, woven into every aspect of Sumerian life. Then there is their architecture. The ziggurat, that massive stepped pyramid that dominated every Sumerian city, was not merely a temple, it was an engineering marvel. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, stood roughly 30 metres tall and covered an area of 64 by 46 metres at its base. It was constructed from millions of sun-dried mud bricks, faced with fired bricks held together with bitumen and naturally occurring asphalt. The builders understood load distribution, the properties of different materials, the need for drainage systems to prevent water damage. They knew how to create structures that would last millennia. But perhaps most remarkable of all was their astronomy. The The Babylonians, who inherited and built upon Sumerian knowledge, could predict lunar eclipses with stunning accuracy. They tracked the movements of the planets, gave them names, and wove them into a sophisticated cosmology. They understood the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in Earth's axis that takes 25 to 20 years to complete one cycle. This should be impossible. Detecting precession requires precise observations recorded and compared over centuries, if not millennia. How did they know? The standard answer is patience and careful observation. Generations of priest astronomers sitting atop their ziggurats, watching the night sky, recording what they saw on clay tablets, comparing their observations to those made by their predecessors. Over time, patterns emerged, knowledge accumulated, and eventually they mapped the heavens with remarkable precision. This is the rational scientific explanation, and it is probably correct. But there is another explanation, one that whispers from the clay, tablets themselves. One that has been dismissed by mainstream scholarship as fantasy, as pseudo-archaeology, as the desperate imaginings of people who cannot accept that our ancestors were capable of genius without outside help. This explanation says that the Sumerians did not discover astronomy. They were taught it. By beings they called the Anunnaki. The word Anunnaki appears throughout Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian and Assyrian texts. In the scholarly consensus it means something like princely offspring or those of royal blood. The Anunnaki were the highest tier of deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon, the children of An, the sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess. They were responsible for decreeing the fates of humanity, for maintaining the cosmic order, for ensuring that the world functioned as it should. They were, in essence, divine bureaucrats, managing the universe like an immense administrative system. Each Sumerian city had its own patron deity, usually a member of the Anunnaki Council. Enlil, the god of air and storms, ruled over the holy city of Nippur. Enki, the god of water, wisdom and magic, presided over Eridu, considered the oldest city. Inanna, the fierce goddess of love and war, claimed Uruk as her domain. These were not distant abstract forces. They were personalities, with desires, conflicts, and very human-like emotions. The myths describe them arguing, scheming, falling in love, waging war against each other. They were powerful, yes, but they were also deeply, recognizably flawed. And according to the texts, they needed something from humanity. The myths tell us that the lesser gods, the Igigi, had been tasked with the back-breaking labour of digging rivers, building mountains, and terraforming the earth to make it suitable for divine habitation. After centuries of this toil, they revolted. They burned their tools and surrounded the house of Enlil, demanding relief. The Divine Council met to address this crisis, and it was Enki, the clever one, who proposed a solution. Why not create a new being, a primitive worker, specifically designed to take over the labour? And thus, according to the Atrahasis epic, humanity was born. The creation story is disturbingly specific. The mother goddess Nintu is instructed to mix clay from the earth with the flesh and blood of a slain god, a deity named Wa'ila, who possessed intelligence. This mixture is then divided into 14 portions, 7 male and 7 female, and implanted into the wombs of 14 birth goddesses who would gestate the first humans. After a set period, the first humans are born. They are called Lulu, meaning mixed ones, because they contain both earthly matter and divine essence. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language describing the mystery of creation. This reads like a recipe, like a set of instructions. It describes a procedure that sounds unsettlingly like genetic engineering, like in vitro fertilization, like the kind of biotechnology that we ourselves are only now beginning to master. And the purpose is explicit. Humans were created to serve, to work, to relieve the gods of their burdens. For millennia, this is exactly what we did. We farmed the fields, we dug the canals, we built the cities, we mined the earth. And the Anunnaki ruled over us, sometimes benevolent, sometimes cruel, but always in control, until something changed. Until the Great Flood came and the world was wiped clean, and humanity was given a second chance. But that second chance came with conditions. The Anunnaki did not leave. They simply withdrew from direct management. They installed a new system, a hierarchy of human kings who would rule in their name, who would carry out their will, who would maintain the order they had established. And slowly over centuries, they faded from view. They became legends, they became myths, they became gods, or at least that is one way to tell the story. It is the way that Zecharia Sitchin told it, in his controversial Mystics book The 12th Planet, which sparked a revolution in how people think about ancient history. Sitchin was not a trained archaeologist or linguist. He was an economist and journalist with a passion for ancient texts and a willingness to interpret them literally, in ways that academics found outrageous. He claimed to have translated Sumerian cuneiform tablets and discovered within them the true history of humanity, a history deliberately suppressed by mainstream scholarship because it was too radical, too dangerous, too world-shattering to accept. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki were not gods at all. They were extraterrestrials from a distant planet called Nibiru, which he identified as a hypothetical 12th member of our solar system, counting the Sun, Moon, and the known planets. Nibiru, he claimed, has a highly elliptical orbit that takes 3,600 Earth years to complete, bringing it periodically into the inner solar system and then flinging it back out into the cold darkness beyond Pluto. During these periodic approaches, the inhabitants of Nibiru would visit Earth to check on their experiment, to gather resources, and to ensure that their creation, humanity, was still fulfilling its purpose. That purpose, according to Sitchin, was gold mining. Nibiru's atmosphere was failing and the Anunnaki needed vast quantities of gold to grind into a fine powder and suspend in their upper atmosphere, creating an artificial shield to trap heat and protect their dying world. They had come to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago because our planet was rich in gold. They established mining operations, primarily in southeastern Africa, and for tens of thousands of years, the Anunnaki themselves did the work, until they could not bear it any longer, until the Igigi revolted, and until Enki, the brilliant scientist, proposed his solution. Create a worker species by genetically modifying the primitive hominids already present on Earth, combining their DNA with Anunnaki genetic material to produce a hybrid being, intelligent enough to follow the instructions, but not so intelligent as to question its servitude. The story Sitchin wove was compelling, grand, and incredibly detailed. He claimed to find evidence for it in cylinder seals, particularly one known as VA-243, which he interpreted as showing the solar system with all 12 members, including Nibiru. He claimed that the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, was not mythology but astronomy, describing a cosmic collision between Nibiru and a primordial planet called Tiamat that shattered Tiamat into pieces, one half becoming Earth and the other forming the asteroid belt. He claimed that the mysteriously long-lived kings listed in the Sumerian king list, who supposedly ruled for tens of thousands of years before a great flood, were not mythical figures, but actual Anunnaki rulers, whose reigns were measured not in human years, but in Nibiruan years. Divide those impossibly long reigns by 3,600, and you get numbers that seem almost plausible. Sitchin's books sold millions of copies. They were translated into dozens of languages. They inspired a generation of alternative historians, ancient astronaut theorists, and conspiracy researchers. They became the foundation for television shows like Ancient Aliens, which has been on the air for over a decade, presenting Sitchin's ideas and variations of them to millions of viewers. The Anunnaki became a household name, a cultural meme, a shorthand for any theory involving ancient extraterrestrial intervention in human affairs. But there is a problem. Actually, there are many problems. Sitchin's translations have been thoroughly debunked by every credible scholar who has examined them. The cylinder seal VA-243 does not show the solar system. The symbols Sitchin identified as planets are, according to experts, simply stars representing gods, a common motif in Mesopotamian art. The central symbol he claimed was the sun is not the sun symbol used in any other Sumerian art. The word Nibiru, which appears in various astronomical texts, does not mean a distant planet on a 300-year orbit. It means crossing point or ferry. In most contexts it refers to Jupiter, and in others it refers to a specific point in the sky, perhaps the celestial equator or the summer solstice. It is an astronomical marker, not a planet. The Enuma Elish is not astronomy. It is mythology. A political text designed to justify the supremacy of Babylon and its patron god Marduk over the older Sumerian city-states. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat is a cosmogonic myth, a story about how order triumphs over chaos, not a description of planetary collisions. And the Sumerian king list, with its impossible reign lengths, is not a historical document. It is propaganda, designed to legitimize the rule of whoever was king at the time by linking them to an unbroken chain of divine authority stretching back to the dawn of time. The numbers are symbolic, representing vast stretches of mythic time, not actual years. Every single piece of evidence Sitchin presented has been challenged, refuted, and dismissed by mainstream scholarship. His work is classified as pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-history, and pseudo-science. He is considered by experts to have misunderstood the texts, mistranslated the words, and imposed a modern science fiction narrative onto ancient religious literature. And yet, despite all of this, his ideas persist. They thrive. Why? Because at some level, they answer a need. They provide a grand narrative, a unifying theory that explains not just who we are, but why we are. They tell us that we are made for a purpose, even if that purpose was servitude. They tell us that we are not alone, that we never were, and that our creators are still out there, watching, waiting. They give meaning to the mystery, and perhaps most importantly, they give us someone to blame. If the Anunnaki created us as slaves, then our struggles, our suffering, our constant sense of being trapped in systems beyond our control, all of it makes sense. We are not failing at being human, we are succeeding at being exactly what we were designed to be. We are worker bees in a cosmic hive, and the queens have simply stepped away for a while. But they built the hive, they set the rules, and we are still following them even now, thousands of years after they vanished from our sight. This is the dark heart of the Anunnaki theory. It is not just about ancient aliens, it is about inheritance. It is about the idea that we did not build this world ourselves. We inherited it. The cities, the hierarchies, the obsession with gold and wealth, the division of labour, the concept of kingship, the very structure of civilization itself, all of it was designed by them, for them. And we have been living in their world ever since, following blueprints we do not fully understand, worshipping at altars whose original purpose we have forgotten. But let us step back from Sitchin's interpretation for a moment. Let us set aside the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the planet Nibiru, the gold mining operation, all of it. Let us return to the texts themselves and ask a simpler question. Who were the Anunnaki really? In the earliest Sumerian texts, dating to around 2600 BCE, the Anunnaki are mentioned as a collective group of deities, often in contrast to the Igigi, who were the lesser, younger gods. The exact number and identity of the Anunnaki varies from text to text, but certain names appear consistently. An, the father of the gods, ruler of the heavens; Enlil, the powerful god of air and storms, often described as the executive authority, the one who enforces divine decrees; Enki, also called Ea, the god of the subterranean freshwater ocean known as the Abzu, associated with wisdom, magic, and craftsmanship; Ninhursag, the earth mother goddess, associated with fertility and childbirth; and several others, including the moon god Nana, the sun god Utu, and the fierce goddess Inanna. These deities were not distant abstract forces. They had temples, cult statues, priests, and worshippers. The Sumerians believed that the statues were not just representations of the gods, but actual dwelling places where the divine presence could manifest. The statues were dressed in fine clothing, given food and drink, carried in processions, and consulted for omens. The relationship between gods and humans was transactional. Humans provided offerings, labour, and worship. In exchange, the gods provided protection, fertile fields, victory in war, and continued existence. It was a contractual arrangement, a cosmic economy. The ziggurats, those towering step pyramids, were the centrepiece of this relationship. Each major city had one, and they dominated the skyline, visible from miles away. The ziggurat was not just a temple, it was a bridge, a meeting point between heaven and earth. At the top was a small shrine, where the god could descend from the heavens to receive offerings and communicate with the priests. The act of climbing the ziggurat was itself a spiritual ascent, a movement from the mundane world below to the sacred realm above. Modern archaeologists have found the remains of dozens of ziggurats across Mesopotamia, and they are remarkable structures. The ziggurat of Ur, for example, was built by King Ur-Nammu around 2100 BCE in honour of the moon god Nana. Its core was made of sun-dried mud bricks, millions of them, but the outer shell was constructed from fired bricks, much more durable and weather-resistant. The bricks were held together with bitumen, and many bore the stamp of the king who commissioned the work. This was not just architecture, this was propaganda, a permanent statement of power and piety. The ziggurats stood approximately 30 metres high, with 3 massive staircases leading to the upper levels. One led straight to the top, while the 2 side staircases met at a mid-level platform before continuing upward. The structure was solid, not hollow like a pyramid. Its sole purpose was to elevate the shrine at the summit, bringing it as close to the heavens as possible. Only priests were allowed to ascend. The common people remained below, their lives structured around the needs of the temple, working its fields, tending its livestock, weaving its cloth, all in service to the god who dwelt at the summit. This is the world the Sumerians built or inherited, or were taught to build, depending on how you interpret the evidence. It was a theocracy, a society where religious authority and political power were inseparably intertwined. The king was not just a military leader or administrator. He was the representative of the gods on earth, chosen to enforce divine will. The earliest Sumerian rulers bore the title En, which can mean lord or priest-king, emphasizing their dual role. And here is where things get interesting. Because if we take the Sumerian texts at face value, if we read them not as religious allegory but as historical memory, however distorted, then what we see is a society that understood itself to be under management. The gods were not distant creators who set the world in motion and then walked away. They were active participants, making decisions, issuing commands, demanding tribute. They fought wars not in some abstract spiritual realm, but right here on Earth, with human armies as their proxies. They married, had children, and formed dynasties. And most importantly, they had needs. They needed food, shelter, labour, worship. They needed us. This is the relationship described in the texts. Humans exist to serve the gods. In return, the gods provide the framework for civilization. They teach us agriculture, writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, all the tools we need to be productive servants. It is not a relationship of equals. It is not even a relationship of parents and children. It is a relationship of masters and slaves, or if you prefer a softer term, of employers and employees. Now, the mainstream interpretation of all this is that these myths reflect the social structure of Sumerian society. The gods needed humans just as the temple needed workers, just as the king needed subjects. The myths were a way of explaining and justifying a hierarchical social order. The gods were projections of human authority, cosmic versions of earthly kings and priests. This makes perfect sense from an anthropological perspective. Every culture creates myths that reinforce its social structures. But there is another way to look at it. What if the causation runs the other way? What if Sumerian society was hierarchical because it was imitating the divine hierarchy? What if the temple economy, with its vast estates, its armies of workers, its meticulous record-keeping, was not a human invention, but a system taught to us by the Anunnaki? What if kingship itself, the idea that one individual should have absolute authority over thousands or millions of others, was not something we came up with on our own, but something we were conditioned to accept? This is the inheritance question at the heart of the Anunnaki theory. Did we inherit a system, a framework, a set of assumptions about how society should be organised? And if we did, are we still living within that framework, even now, even after thousands of years, even though the original architects are long gone? Consider the concept of divine kingship, which appears not just in Mesopotamia but in Egypt, in China, in Mesoamerica, in almost every complex ancient civilization. The king is not just a political leader. He is a god, or the son of a god, or the representative of the gods. His authority is absolute because it is divinely sanctioned. To disobey the king is to disobey the gods themselves. This is not just propaganda. This is theology, and it was incredibly effective. It allowed a tiny elite to control vast populations, to extract tribute and labour on a scale that would otherwise have been impossible. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus, and after death became Osiris. In China, the emperor ruled by the mandate of heaven. In Mesoamerica, kings performed blood rituals to communicate with the gods and ensure cosmic order. Everywhere we look, we see the same pattern. Power flows from heaven to earth, from the gods to the king to the people. It is a chain of command, a hierarchy that is eternal and unquestionable. And it worked. It worked so well that we still have not fully escaped it. Even in modern democracies, we still speak of the rule of law as something above us, something we must obey. We still organise ourselves into hierarchies, with bosses and employees, with leaders and followers. We still accept that some people should have power over others, that some voices matter more than others, that wealth equals worth. These are not natural laws. These are cultural assumptions, patterns of thinking that were established thousands of years ago and have been reinforced ever since. But where did those assumptions come from? Did they emerge naturally from the complexity of organising large groups of people? Or were they taught to us deliberately, by beings who understood that the best way to control a population is to make them believe that control is natural, inevitable, divinely ordained? The Anunnaki theory, stripped of its extraterrestrial trappings, suggests that human civilization is not something we built from scratch. It is something we inherited from a previous order. Whether that order was alien or merely more advanced, whether the Anunnaki were beings from another planet or survivors of a lost Ice Age civilization or simply a misunderstood priestly class, the effect is the same. We are living in a world built to someone else's specifications, following rules we did not write, working toward goals we do not fully understand, and there is evidence for this, not in spaceships and gold mines, but in the archaeological record itself, because one of the great mysteries of the Sumerian civilization is not just how advanced they were, but how suddenly they appeared, as if they did not evolve naturally but were planted, as if someone came along and said, "Here is writing, here is mathematics, here is law, here is agriculture, now build cities and worship us," and they did. But the Sumerians were not the only ones. Across the ancient world we see similar patterns. In Egypt, the first dynasty appears around 3100 BCE with a fully developed writing system, monumental architecture, and a complex state apparatus. In the Indus Valley, cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro emerge around 2600 BCE with sophisticated urban planning, standardized bricks, and drainage systems that would not be equaled in Europe for thousands of years. In China, the Shang dynasty suddenly has bronze metallurgy, writing, and chariots around 1600 BCE. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization appears around 1400 BCE with colossal stone heads, a writing system, and knowledge of astronomy. The pattern is the same everywhere. Sudden jumps in complexity, sophisticated technologies appearing without clear precursors, knowledge that seems too advanced for the time, and in every case myths of gods descending from the heavens to teach humanity the arts of civilization. In Egypt, Thoth gave humans writing and wisdom. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl brought knowledge and law. In India, the Vedic texts speak of the Devas, celestial beings who interacted with humans. In China, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors were semi-divine culture heroes who taught humanity how to live. The myths are usually dismissed as just that, myths, symbolic stories explaining the unexplainable. But what if they are not? What if they are memories distorted by time and translation, but memories nonetheless of real events? What if there was a time when humanity was guided, taught, managed by beings who possessed knowledge far beyond what Stone Age hunter-gatherers should have had? This is where the theory starts to sound less like science fiction and more like history, because we know that civilizations rise and fall, we know that knowledge can be lost, we know that cataclysms happen. The last ice age ended around 11,700 years ago, and it did not end gently. There was a period of rapid warming followed by a sudden, brutal return to near-glacial conditions around 12,800 years ago. This event is called the Younger Dryas, and it lasted for over 1,000 years. It was a climate catastrophe that would have devastated any human populations that existed at the time. And here is where things get even more interesting, because there is growing evidence, controversial but growing, that the Younger Dryas was not caused by gradual climate shifts but by a cosmic impact. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck Earth around 12,800 years ago, triggering massive wildfires, a nuclear winter effect that plunged the planet back into cold conditions, and a disruption of ocean currents that prolonged the cooling. This event would have been catastrophic. It would have wiped out large mammals, destroyed ecosystems, and killed off any advanced human societies that existed at the time. And here is the question. What if there was an advanced human society at the time? What if, during the Ice Age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today, when the climate was different, when vast stretches of now-submerged coastline were dry land, what if humans built something? What if they achieved a level of sophistication that we have no record of because it was utterly destroyed? buried under hundreds of feet of ocean water or obliterated by the cosmic impact. This is the theory popularized by researchers like Graham Hancock, who argues that there was a lost civilization, a forgotten episode in human history that existed before the catastrophe. This civilization did not have iPhones and jet planes, but it did have advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, engineering, and navigation. It built monuments that aligned with the stars. It understood the precession of the equinoxes. It mapped the world. And when the catastrophe came, when the comet fragments struck and the world burned and froze, most of this civilization was destroyed. But some survived. The survivors, the culture bearers, the knowledge keepers scattered across the world. They sought out groups of hunter-gatherers and began to teach them. They taught them how to farm, how to build, how to organize society. They gave them the gift of civilization, not because they were gods, but because they were human survivors of a lost world trying to preserve what they could. And over time, as generations passed, the survivors died, and their descendants intermarried with the locals. The memory of what they had been, of the world they had come from, faded into myth. They became gods. They became the Anunnaki. This theory is speculative. It is not accepted by mainstream archaeology, but it is less speculative than ancient aliens. It is based on a known catastrophe, the Younger Dryas impact, and a known phenomenon, the rise of sea levels after the Ice Age, that would have submerged thousands of miles of coastline where humans almost certainly lived. We have only explored a tiny fraction of the ocean floor. We do not know what is down there. We do not know what was lost. And if this theory is even partially correct, then the inheritance we are talking about is not from aliens, but from our own forgotten ancestors. The Anunnaki were not beings from another planet. They were humans from another age, an age we have forgotten, an age whose ruins lie beneath the waves and whose knowledge was passed down to us through myths and symbols we no longer understand. But even if we accept this more grounded version of the story, the implications are profound. Because it means that civilization, everything we think of as human progress, was not something we built from the ground up, but it was jump-started. We were given a head start. The wheel, agriculture, writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, all of these things, the building blocks of civilization, may have been taught to us by survivors of a lost world. And if that is true, then we have been living in the shadow of that lost world ever since, following patterns and structures that were established not by us, but for us. The ziggurat, that towering structure at the heart of every Sumerian city, takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. It is not just a temple, it is a memory, a physical echo of something that came before. Perhaps the knowledge keepers who came after the catastrophe remembered great structures, towering edifices that reached toward the sky, and they taught the Sumerians to build them, not as exact replicas, but as symbolic recreations. The ziggurat is humanity saying we remember when there was something greater. And the same is true for the myths. The stories of gods descending from the heavens, of wars in the sky, of cosmic battles and floods and fire. These are not fun fantasies. They are memories, passed down through oral tradition, distorted by time, translated and retranslated, but memories nonetheless. The Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of Noah, the Hindu Vedas, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, all of these ancient texts from cultures separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years contain the same core stories. Creation, flood, destruction, rebirth. These are not coincidences. These are echoes of real events, events that shaped humanity so profoundly that we have been trying to make sense of them ever since. So what does it mean to inherit a world once ruled by the Anunnaki? It means, at the most basic level, that we did not start from zero. We were given tools, knowledge, structures. We were shown how to organize, how to build, how to survive in a world that had recently been devastated by catastrophe. And the beings who taught us, whether they were gods, aliens, or human survivors, they left more than just knowledge. They left a framework. They left a worldview. They left a way of thinking about power, authority, hierarchy, and human purpose that we are still following today. Consider the economic systems that emerged in ancient Mesopotamia. The temple economy, where vast estates owned by the gods, managed by priests, produced food and goods that were distributed to workers in exchange for labour. This was not capitalism. This was not communism. This was something else entirely, a centrally planned economy run by a theocratic elite who claimed to be acting on behalf of divine authority. And it worked. It worked so well that it spread with variations to every major civilization that followed. The Egyptians had a similar system, where the pharaoh owned all the land and all the people, and everyone worked for the state, which was synonymous with the gods. The Chinese had the same model, where the emperor was the son of heaven, and all authority flowed from him. Even in Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec city-states were theocratic, with priest-kings managing vast agricultural and labour systems in the name of the gods. This is not a natural development. This is a learned behaviour, a system that was taught and then replicated because it was effective at organising large populations and extracting resources. And we are still living in variations of this system today. We have replaced the gods with governments, the priests with bureaucrats, the temples with capital cities. But the structure is the same. A small elite at the top claims authority. A vast middle class administers the system, and the majority of people work to produce the resources that keep everything running. We call it civilization. We call it progress. But is it? Or is it simply the continuation of a system designed thousands of years ago to manage a worker population? This is the disturbing question at the heart of the Anunnaki theory. Are we free, or are we still, in some fundamental way, following the script that was written for us by beings who saw us as servants, as tools, as a means to an end? Have we ever broken free of that original design? Or have we simply internalized it so deeply that we no longer see the cage we are living in? The ancient texts are explicit about humanity's purpose. We were created to work. We were created to serve. The gods needed labourers, and so they made us. And when we question this, when we rebel, when we try to assert our own autonomy, the response is always the same. Order must be maintained. Authority must be respected. The system must continue. This is the message of the flood myths. Humans grew too numerous, too noisy, too independent, and the gods decided to wipe us out. It was only through the intervention of a sympathetic god, Enki in the Mesopotamian version, that a remnant was saved. And even then, the price of survival was continued obedience. This is not a message of love. This is not a message of divine grace. This is a message of control. And it has been repeated in various forms throughout human history. Obey the king, obey the law, obey the system, because the alternative is chaos. The alternative is destruction. The alternative is the flood. But what if the flood already happened? What if we are the survivors? What if the world we inherited, the world the Anunnaki supposedly ruled, was itself destroyed, and what we have now is a pale shadow of what once was? This is the tragic possibility at the heart of the theory, that we are not living in the world the Anunnaki built for themselves. We are living in the ruins of that world, trying to make sense of the fragments they left behind. The Sumerians, in this view, were not the creation of the Anunnaki. They were the descendants of the survivors, inheriting knowledge and structures from a lost age, doing their best to rebuild, but never quite understanding the full picture. The myths they wrote, the gods they worshipped, the systems they built, all of it was an attempt to recreate something that was already gone. They were cargo cultists, worshipping the memory of beings they barely understood, building ziggurats not because they knew why, but because they had been told that this was how you connect with the gods. And we are still doing it. We are still building ziggurats, metaphorically speaking. We are still worshipping at the altar of progress, of growth, of hierarchy, of authority. We are still organising ourselves into rigid structures because that is what we were taught to do. We are still extracting resources from the earth, exploiting labour, concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a few, because that is the system we inherited. We call it different names. We tell ourselves different stories, but the pattern is the same. So what do we do with this knowledge? What do we do if we accept, even as a thought experiment, that human civilization is not something we built from scratch, but something we inherited, something we were taught, something designed by beings who saw us as servants? Do we reject it? Do we tear it all down and start over? Or do we acknowledge it, understand it, and try to build something better? Because here is the thing, even if the Anunnaki were real, even if they created us, even if they designed our society, they are not here anymore. They left. They vanished. They became myths. And that means that the world is ours now. The systems they built, the structures they left behind, we can change them. We can adapt them. We can evolve beyond them. We are not bound by their original intentions. We are not slaves to their design. We are inheritors, yes, but inheritors have the right to renovate, to rebuild, to reimagine what they have been given. This is the empowering aspect of the Anunnaki theory that often gets overlooked. It tells us that our systems are not natural. They are not inevitable. They were designed. And if they were designed, they can be redesigned. The hierarchies we live under, the economic systems we participate in, the ways we organise power and distribute resources, none of this is set in stone. None of this is the only way things can be. It is just the way things have been, because that is what we were taught. But we can learn new things, we can question old assumptions, we can look at the ziggurat and say, that is a monument to an old order, an order that saw us as servants. We do not need to keep building ziggurats. We can build something else, something that reflects not what we were designed to be, but what we choose to become. This is the true inheritance of the Anunnaki, if they ever existed. They gave us civilization, yes. They gave us knowledge, structure, order. But they also gave us a choice, whether they intended to or not. We can accept the world they built, or we can transform it. We can be the servants they intended, or we can be something more. We can be the inheritors who finally claimed their inheritance and made it their own. The Sumerian texts end not with the triumph of the gods, but with their withdrawal. The Anunnaki fade from the story. The kings they appointed continue to rule, but the gods themselves become more distant, more abstract. By the time we reach the Babylonian period, the Assyrian period, the gods are no longer walking the earth. They are in the heavens, far away, watching but not interfering. And by the time we reach the modern era, they are not even that. They are myths, legends, stories we tell to explain the inexplicable. But their legacy remains in the cities we build, in the hierarchies we accept, in the way we structure power and authority, in the assumption that some people are meant to rule and others are meant to serve. In the idea that work is not just something we do, but something we are obligated to do, a duty we owe to forces greater than ourselves. These are the invisible chains of the Anunnaki. These are the ways in which we are still living in their world, even though they are long gone. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not whether the Anunnaki were real, not whether they were aliens or humans or gods, but why we have not yet fully escaped them. Why, after thousands of years, we are still following the patterns they established. Why we are still building our own ziggurats, worshipping our own gods of power and wealth, organising ourselves into hierarchies that benefit the few at the expense of the many. Maybe it is because those patterns are deeply ingrained. Maybe it is because they are effective, at least in the short term. Maybe it is because we have never been shown an alternative. Or maybe it is because, on some level, we are still waiting. Waiting for the Anunnaki to come back. Waiting for the gods to return and tell us what to do. Waiting for someone, anyone, to give us permission to break free. But they are not coming back. If they ever existed, they are gone. And that means the choice is ours. We can continue to live in the world they built, or we can build something new. We can continue to be the servants, the workers, the obedient children, or we can become the architects of our own destiny. We can inherit the world, or we can transform it. The ziggurat still stands in the moonlight, a monument to a lost age, a symbol of power and hierarchy and the connection between heaven and earth. It is beautiful and terrible, a reminder of what we once were and what we might become. And as you stand before it, as you feel the weight of all those centuries pressing down upon you, you have to ask yourself, what will you do with this inheritance? Will you climb the ziggurat? Will you ascend to the shrine at the summit and wait for the gods to return? Or will you walk away into the darkness, into the unknown, and begin to build something that is truly yours? The choice has always been yours. The Anunnaki, if they ever existed, are gone. The world they built is ours now. What we do with it, that is the story we are still writing. And it is a story that will echo through the ages, just as the myths of the Anunnaki have echoed through ours. We are the inheritors. We are the survivors. We are the ones who will decide what comes next. But before we can answer that question, we need to go deeper. We need to look at the specific claims, the specific evidence, and the specific ways in which this inheritance might manifest in our world today. Because if we are still living in a world designed by the Anunnaki, then the evidence should be everywhere. It should be in our institutions, our languages, our symbols, our unconscious assumptions about how the world works. Let us examine this evidence. Start with language itself. The Sumerian language is unique. It is what linguists call an isolate, meaning it has no clear relationship to any other known language family. It did not evolve from something else. It simply appeared, fully formed around 200 BCE, with a complete grammar, a vast vocabulary, and the ability to express complex abstract ideas. This is unusual. Most languages can be traced back through time, showing clear evolutionary relationships with parent languages and sibling languages, but Sumerian stands alone. The standard explanation is that Sumerian is simply the last survivor of a language family that died out, and we have not yet found evidence of its relatives. This is possible. Languages go extinct all the time, and the archaeological record is incomplete, but it is also possible that Sumerian was not a naturally evolved language at all. What if it was designed? What if the Anunnaki, or whoever taught the Sumerians, created a language specifically for the purpose of recording information, conducting commerce, and administering a complex society? This might sound far-fetched, but consider what linguists call constructed languages, or conlangs. In the modern era, we have Esperanto, created in the late 19th century as a universal second language. We have Logban, designed to be logically precise and unambiguous. We have the languages created for fiction, like Klingon or Elvish. These are languages built from scratch, designed to serve specific purposes. And they work. People learn them, people use them. They have grammar, vocabulary, and expressive power that rivals natural languages. What if Sumerian was the world's first conlang? What if it was given to a population that had no writing at all, as a tool to help them organise their newly complex society? This would explain why it appears so suddenly, why it has no clear relatives, and why it is so remarkably sophisticated from the very beginning. It was not the result of slow evolution, it was the result of deliberate design. And the same might be true of the sexagesimal, base 60 mathematical system. This is not an intuitive system. Most human cultures that develop mathematics independently use base 10, likely because we have 10 fingers. Some cultures use base 20, counting fingers and toes. Base 5 appears in some languages, but base 60, that is strange. It is a highly composite number, meaning it has many divisors, which makes it excellent for fractions and calculations. But it is not something you would naturally stumble upon while counting sheep. The Sumerians used base 60 for everything. Time, angles, astronomical calculations, and we still use it today. There are 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. This is a 6,000-year-old system that we have never replaced because it works so well. But where did it come from? Why did the Sumerians choose 60? The standard answer is that it emerged from a combination of factors, possibly the merging of a base 12 and a base 5 system used by different groups in the region. But there is no solid evidence for this. It is speculation. An alternative explanation is that base 60 was taught to the Sumerians because it was the system used by whoever came before them. The Anunnaki, or the survivors of a lost civilization, had already developed a sophisticated mathematical system, and when they began teaching the Sumerians, they simply passed it on. The Sumerians did not understand why it was base 60. They just knew that this was the right way to count, the way the gods counted, and so they used it, and passed it on, and we are still using it today without really knowing why. This is what inheritance looks like. It is not always conscious, it is not always understood. Sometimes we follow patterns simply because that is how things have always been done. And if those patterns were established by beings far more advanced than us, beings who had good reasons for doing things a certain way, then we might follow those patterns for thousands of years without ever questioning them. Now let us turn to the symbols, the iconography, the visual language of ancient Mesopotamia. There are certain images that appear over and over in Sumerian and Akkadian art. The winged disc, representing the sun or a deity. The tree of life, a stylized plant flanked by two figures. The 7 gods who decree fate, represented by 7 dots or stars. And then there are the curious objects that appear in the hands of the gods in many carved reliefs. These objects look, to modern eyes, strangely like purses or buckets. They are rectangular or cone-shaped containers held by a handle, often depicted being carried by gods or by the bird-headed Apkallu, the 7 sages who brought knowledge to humanity before the flood. Mainstream archaeology identifies these as vessels for holy water or pollen, used in purification rituals. This is a reasonable interpretation based on the context in which they appear. But here is the interesting thing. Similar objects appear in the art of other ancient civilizations, thousands of miles and thousands of years apart. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec and the Maya carved figures holding nearly identical handbag-shaped objects. In ancient Egypt, gods and pharaohs are sometimes depicted holding containers that look remarkably similar. In Göbekli Tepe, the 11,600-year-old megalithic site in Turkey, there are carvings that some researchers interpret as showing the same kind of object. This cross-cultural similarity is puzzling. Mainstream archaeology explains it as convergent evolution, the idea that similar forms arise independently because they serve similar functions. A container is a container. Different cultures will invent similar ways to carry things. This is logical. But it is also possible that the similarity is not coincidental. What if these objects are not just symbolic but representational? What if they depict actual objects and actual tools that were used by a transoceanic culture or by survivors of a lost civilization who travelled to different parts of the world after a catastrophe? This is where the ancient astronaut theorists get excited, claiming that these are pieces of advanced technology, power sources or communication devices. But you do not need aliens to explain transoceanic contact. You just need boats, knowledge of currents and winds, and a compelling reason to travel, such as fleeing a catastrophe. If a sophisticated maritime culture existed during the Ice Age, when sea levels were lower and coastlines were different, they could have reached every continent. And when their world was destroyed, the survivors who washed up on distant shores would have brought with them symbols, knowledge, and technologies that would seem miraculous to the Stone Age peoples they encountered. Over time, these objects and symbols would be incorporated into local cultures, their original meaning forgotten, but their form preserved because they were associated with the powerful strangers who had brought so much knowledge. The handbag becomes a symbol of wisdom, of divine authority, of the connection between the human and the sacred. And it spreads not through independent invention, but through actual diffusion, through the movement of people and ideas across vast distances. This is a testable hypothesis. If we could examine the DNA of ancient populations across multiple continents, looking for evidence of contact and mixing that should not be there according to the standard model of human migration, we might find surprising connections. And in fact, we are finding them. Ancient DNA studies are revealing that human populations were far more mobile, far more interconnected than we previously believed. There were multiple waves of migration. There was back migration. There was mixture between groups that were supposed to be isolated. The story of human prehistory is far more complex and far more dynamic than the old model suggested. And if human populations were more mobile, then so was knowledge. Ideas, technologies, and symbols could have spread far more rapidly than we thought possible. A maritime culture, fleeing a catastrophe, could have seeded civilization in multiple locations, teaching the same basic package of knowledge, agriculture, architecture, mathematics, astronomy, to different groups of hunter-gatherers. And each of those groups would have developed their own unique variations, their own cultural elaborations, but the core would be the same, the ziggurat in Mesopotamia, the pyramid in Egypt, the temple mound in Mesoamerica. All variations on a theme, all reaching toward the sky, all trying to connect the earthly and the divine. Now let us examine the myth of kingship itself, because this might be the most enduring inheritance from the Anunnaki. The idea that one person should rule over many is not natural. It does not appear in small-scale societies. Hunter-gatherer bands are typically egalitarian, with decisions made by consensus, with leadership based on skill and experience rather than hereditary authority. Even in early agricultural communities, there is often a great deal of social equality, with communal ownership of land and collective decision-making. But once you reach a certain scale, once a society grows beyond a few hundred people, something changes. Hierarchies emerge. Leaders become chiefs. Chiefs become kings. And kings become gods. This is the pattern we see over and over in the archaeological record. The more complex a society becomes, the more rigidly hierarchical it becomes. And the ultimate justification for this hierarchy is always the same. The gods ordained it. In Mesopotamia, the king was chosen by the gods and ruled as their representative on earth. The Sumerian king list begins with the famous line, "When kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu." Kingship did not arise from human society. It descended. It was given. And the early kings, the ones who ruled before the flood, were not entirely human. They were demigods, hybrids, beings who lived for tens of thousands of years. Only after the flood did fully human kings take over, but they still ruled by divine right, still claimed to be carrying out the will of the gods. This mythology of divine kingship spread to every complex society that emerged in the ancient world. It was not imported from Mesopotamia in every case, but the pattern is the same. The king is special, the king is chosen, the king has a direct line to the divine, and therefore the king's authority is absolute. To question the king is to question the gods themselves. This is a powerful tool of social control. It allows a tiny elite to dominate a vast population, to extract tribute and labour, to wage wars and build monuments, all in the name of divine mandate. But where did this idea come from? Did it evolve naturally as a way of legitimizing the concentration of power? Or was it taught deliberately as a way of organizing human societies for maximum efficiency? If the Anunnaki, or whoever played that role, wanted to create a civilization that could produce resources on a large scale, they would need a system of centralized authority. They would need a hierarchy, and the most effective way to create a stable hierarchy is to make it sacred, to make it unquestionable, to make it part of the cosmic order. This is what the Sumerians did. This is what the Egyptians did. This is what every ancient civilization did, and we have never fully escaped it. Even in modern democracies, even in societies that claim to have abolished hereditary monarchy, we still have leaders, we still have hierarchies, we still have systems of authority that most people accept as legitimate. We have simply replaced the gods with other forms of legitimation, the social contract, the rule of law, the will of the people. But the structure is the same. A small group at the top makes decisions, the majority at the bottom follows those decisions, and anyone who refuses to follow is punished. Is this inheritance? Is this a system we learned from the Anunnaki and have never managed to replace? Or is it simply the inevitable outcome of organising large groups of humans? The honest answer is that we do not know, but the question is worth asking. Because if our social structures are not natural, if they are designed, then they can be redesigned. We are not doomed to repeat the patterns of the past. We can imagine something different. Let us also consider the curious obsession with gold that appears in every ancient civilization. Gold is not particularly useful. It is too soft to make tools or weapons. It does not rust, which makes it good for decorative purposes, but there are other materials that serve that function. And yet, from the very earliest civilizations, gold was valued above almost everything else. It was hoarded by kings, offered to the gods, buried with the dead. Why? The standard answer is that gold is rare, beautiful, and incorruptible. It shines like the sun. It does not tarnish. It is therefore a symbol of divinity, of immortality, of purity. And humans, being what they are, have always valued rare and beautiful things. This is a perfectly good explanation. But the Anunnaki theory offers another one. What if gold was valuable not because of its symbolic properties, but because of its practical properties? What if the Anunnaki, or the survivors of a lost civilization, needed gold for technological purposes that we no longer understand? Sitchin claimed that the Anunnaki used gold to create a protective shield in their planet's atmosphere. This is, to be charitable, speculative. But gold does have unique physical properties. It is an excellent conductor of electricity. It is highly reflective. It is resistant to corrosion. Modern technology uses gold in electronics, in spacecraft, in medical devices. It is valuable not just because it is pretty, but because it does things that other materials cannot do. What if an advanced civilization, whether extraterrestrial or terrestrial, discovered uses for gold that ancient peoples could not understand but were taught to value anyway? The Anunnaki say, you must mine gold, you must collect gold, you must bring it to the temples. The humans do not understand why, but they do it anyway because the gods command it. And over time, even after the Anunnaki are gone, even after the original purpose is forgotten, the value of gold persists. It becomes symbolic, yes, but it started as something practical. And we are still mining it, hoarding it, valuing it thousands of years later, without fully remembering why. This is inheritance. This is how knowledge becomes tradition, how purpose becomes ritual, how the practical becomes the sacred. And once something is sacred, it becomes very difficult to question. Why do we value gold? Because we always have. Because it is beautiful. Because it is rare. Because the gods say so. These answers are not wrong, but they are incomplete. They do not explain the origin, only the continuation. Now, let us talk about the flood. Because the flood myth is universal. It appears in the myths of almost every ancient culture. The Mesopotamian version, the story of Utnapishtim or Atrahasis, is the oldest written account. But the story of Noah in the Bible, the story of Deucalion in Greek mythology, the story of Manu in Hindu tradition, the story of Gunyu in China, the story of the Great Flood in countless indigenous American traditions, they all describe the same basic event. The world is destroyed by water. A chosen few survive by building a boat. The waters recede. Humanity begins again. The mainstream explanation is that these are all memories of local flooding events, exaggerated and mythologized over time. River valleys flood, coastal areas are inundated by tsunamis. These are terrifying, traumatic events, and they leave a deep impression on the survivors. Over time, a particularly bad flood becomes the flood, the cosmic event that destroyed the entire world. This is how myths are born. But there is another explanation. What if there actually was a global or near-global catastrophic event that involved massive flooding? We know that at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by hundreds of feet as the glaciers melted. We know that this process was not smooth and gradual. There were periods of very rapid rise, possibly triggered by the sudden collapse of ice dams that held back massive glacial lakes. When those dams broke, the released water would have been enough to cause catastrophic flooding across huge areas. And if the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is correct, if fragments of a comet struck Earth around 12,800 years ago, the immediate effects would have been devastating. The impact would have vaporized ice, triggering massive floods. It would have ignited wildfires on a continental scale, producing ash and smoke that blocked the sun and caused a nuclear winter. It would have disrupted ocean currents, prolonging the cooling. And it would have wiped out large animal populations and devastated any human societies that existed at the time. This is not mythology. This is climatology. This is geology. This is the kind of event that would have been remembered, that would have been passed down through oral tradition for generations, that would have been written down as soon as writing was invented. And the survivors, wherever they were, would have had a story to tell, a story of a world destroyed, a story of a few who escaped, a story of a promise often made by a sympathetic god that it would never happen again. In the Mesopotamian version, it is Enki who warns Utnapishtim. In the biblical version, it is Yahweh who tells Noah. In every version, there is a deity who takes pity on a righteous individual and gives them the knowledge they need to survive. And after the flood, after the waters recede, the survivors emerge to a world that has been wiped clean. And they are given a mission. Rebuild, repopulate, remember, this is the inheritance. We are the descendants of the survivors. We carry within us the memory of the catastrophe encoded in our myths, in our stories, in our unconscious fears of water and darkness and the end of the world. And we carry the knowledge that was preserved, the knowledge that allowed civilization to be rebuilt, the knowledge of agriculture and animal husbandry and architecture and writing. All of it passed down carefully, deliberately, by those who survived, who refused to let the old world be forgotten entirely. The Anunnaki in this reading are not aliens. They are the survivors. They are the culture bearers. They are the ones who came after the flood, who taught the scattered remnants of humanity how to live again, how to organize, how to build. And they did it by establishing a system, a framework, a set of instructions that would ensure stability, order, and the continuity of knowledge. That system is kingship. That system is hierarchy. That system is the temple economy. That system is civilization itself. And we are still living in it. We are still following the blueprint they laid down, not because we are slaves, not because we have no choice, but because it works. It has kept humanity alive, organized and productive for 6,000 years. The question is not whether it works. The question is whether it is the only thing that works. The question is whether we can imagine something different, something that does not require hierarchy, does not require kings, does not require the division of humanity into rulers and ruled, owners and workers, the chosen and the expendable. This is the challenge the Anunnaki inheritance presents us. We have been so successful at following their model that we have never seriously tried anything else. We have tweaked it, modified it, given it different names, but the core structure remains. And maybe that is fine. Maybe that is how things have to be. Or maybe we are on the cusp of something new, something that the Anunnaki never imagined, something that will allow us to finally step out of their shadow and create a world that is truly our own. Consider the technology we now possess. For the first time in human history, we have the ability to communicate instantly with anyone, anywhere in the world. We have the ability to access the sum total of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. We have the ability to coordinate massive projects without the need for centralized authority. We have the ability to create decentralized systems, peer-to-peer networks, consensus-based decision-making on a global scale. These are tools that the Anunnaki, if they existed, never had. These are tools that might allow us to finally break free of the hierarchical model they established. But we are not there yet. We are still using these new tools to reinforce old patterns. We have replaced physical temples with digital platforms, but they are still controlled by a tiny elite. We have replaced kings with CEOs, but they still wield enormous power over the lives of millions. We have replaced the gods with algorithms, but we still do not fully understand how they work or what they are optimizing for. We are living in a world that is simultaneously more connected and more centralized than ever before. And that is not an accident. That is the inheritance. The Anunnaki, real or mythical, taught us that power should be concentrated, that knowledge should be controlled, that the many exist to serve the few. And we have internalized that lesson so deeply that even when we build new systems, even when we claim to be creating something revolutionary, we end up recreating the same old structures. Decentralized in theory, centralized in practice, democratic in name, oligarchic in function, free in appearance, controlled in reality. Breaking free of this inheritance will require more than just new technology. It will require new ways of thinking, new values, new assumptions about what is possible and what is desirable. It will require us to question everything we take for granted about how societies should be organized. And that is terrifying, because the Anunnaki model, for all its flaws, has been incredibly stable. It has survived wars, famines, plagues, revolutions. It has proven itself adaptable, resilient, and effective at maintaining order. Replacing it with something untested, something experimental, something that might fail catastrophically, that is a huge risk. But maybe it is a risk worth taking, because the alternative is to continue living in a world designed by beings who are long gone, following rules we do not fully understand, working toward goals that were never ours to begin with. The alternative is to remain forever the inheritors, never the creators, and that is no way to live. The ancient mystery, then, is not just about the past, it is about the future. The question is not just who the Anunnaki were, but what we will become. Will we continue to be defined by what we inherited, or will we finally define ourselves? Will we continue to build ziggurats, literal or metaphorical, reaching toward a heaven that does not answer? Or will we build something new, something that reflects our own values, our own dreams, our own vision of what humanity can be? The ziggurat stands in the moonlight, ancient and eternal, a monument to the Anunnaki and to the world they built. But it is not the only possible monument. It is not the only way to reach for the divine, to connect with something greater than ourselves. We can build different structures. We can create different systems. We can imagine different futures. The Anunnaki, if they ever existed, are gone. Their world is ours now. What we do with it, that is the story we are still writing. And it is a story that will echo through the ages, just as the myths of the Anunnaki have echoed through ours. We are the inheritors. We are the survivors. We are the ones who will decide what comes next. The ancient mystery whispers one final question into the night. Not who were the Anunnaki, but who are we? Are we still their creation, or have we become something more? The answer, like the ziggurat itself, towers above us, waiting to be discovered. And perhaps, in the end, the answer is both. We are their creation, yes, we carry their inheritance, but we are also our own creation. We are the ones who have taken what they gave us and transformed it, adapted it, made it ours. We are not just inheritors, we are also innovators. We are not just followers, we are also leaders. We are not just workers, we are also dreamers. And dreams, unlike stone monuments, unlike clay tablets, unlike even the most sophisticated systems of control, dreams cannot be inherited. Dreams must be created anew by each generation, by each individual. And it is in our dreams that we will finally find the answer to the question of who we are. Not in the ruins of the past, not in the myths of the Anunnaki, but in the vision of the future that we create together, free from the shadows of those who came before, building something that is entirely, authentically, gloriously our own. As you stand in the cool night air, the weight of all this history settling upon your shoulders like an invisible mantle, you realize that the question was never really about ancient astronauts or lost civilizations, or whether the Anunnaki were real. The question was always about us, about what it means to be human in a world we did not entirely create, following patterns we did not entirely choose, working toward goals that were set for us long before we were born. The Sumerians looked up at the stars from atop their ziggurats and wondered about the gods who lived there. We look up at the stars from our cities of glass and steel and wonder if anyone is looking back. We build spacecraft and send them into the void, carrying messages about who we are and where we come from, hoping that someone, somewhere, will receive them and understand. We are still trying to make contact, still trying to reconnect with something we feel we have lost, something we sense was once there but is there no longer. Maybe the Anunnaki were never real. Maybe they were always symbols, metaphors, projections of our own fears and hopes onto the blank canvas of the unknown. Maybe they represent not beings from another world, but the lost potential of our own world, the knowledge and sophistication that was destroyed by the catastrophe and that we have been trying to rebuild ever since. Maybe they are us, or rather they are who we were before the flood, before the fall, before we forgot. Or maybe they were real. Maybe beings did come here, whether from another planet or from another time, and they did shape us, teach us, mould us into something we would not have become on our own. Maybe we are, in some very real sense, their children, their creations, their legacy. And maybe they are gone not because they abandoned us, but because they never really existed as separate beings. Maybe they were always a part of us, the divine spark, the fragment of intelligence that makes us more than just animals, more than just survivors. Maybe the gods were never in the sky. Maybe they were always in our minds, in our capacity for language and reason and creativity and wonder. This is the deepest mystery of all, the mystery of consciousness itself. Where did it come from? How did we go from being just another species of ape to being the creatures who write epics and build cities and split atoms and reach for the stars? Evolution explains the biology, but does it explain the leap? Does it explain the sudden appearance of art and music and ritual and religion in the archaeological record? Does it explain why we, alone among all the animals, look up at the night sky and ask why? The Anunnaki theory in its many forms is an attempt to answer that question, to give us an origin story that feels adequate to the magnitude of what we have become. We are not just accidents. We are not just the random products of blind evolutionary forces. We are designed. We are intentional. We are in some sense divine, even if that divinity was given to us by flawed, fallible beings who were themselves struggling to survive, who made us not out of love but out of need. At least it gives us a purpose, a place in a larger cosmic story. But here is the truth that the Anunnaki theory both reveals and conceals. We do not need them. We do not need gods or aliens or ancient astronauts to explain our greatness or excuse our failures. We are capable of both extraordinary brilliance and terrible cruelty all on our own. We built the ziggurats, we invented writing and mathematics and astronomy. We created art and music and literature. We organized ourselves into complex societies. We did all of this, not because we were taught by superior beings, but because we are, ourselves, capable of greatness. And yes, we also created slavery and war and oppression. We built hierarchies that crushed the many for the benefit of the few. We destroyed environments, exterminated species, and committed atrocities against our own kind. We did all of this too, not because we were designed to be servants, but because we are, ourselves, capable of terrible things. The Anunnaki inheritance, whether real or imagined, is simply us. It is the accumulated wisdom and accumulated folly of 6,000 years of civilization. It is the structures and systems and patterns of thought that have been passed down from generation to generation, modified and adapted and transformed, but never entirely replaced. We inherit the world not from the Anunnaki but from our own ancestors, human beings who did their best with what they had, who made choices that seemed right at the time, who built systems that worked for them, even if they do not work for us. And we will pass this world on to our own descendants, who will inherit from us, who will live with the consequences of our choices, who will struggle with the systems we created, who will build their own ziggurats or tear ours down. This is the true meaning of inheritance. Not a gift from the gods, but a responsibility to the future. So as the night deepens and the stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance, as the ziggurat stands silent and eternal in the moonlight, you make your choice. You do not climb the steps. You do not wait for the gods to return. You turn away, walking into the darkness, carrying with you the knowledge of what came before, but not bound by it. You are an inheritor, yes, but you are also a creator. You are shaped by the past, yes, but you are also shaping the future. And in that moment, standing at the threshold between the ancient world and the modern one, between myth and history, between what we were given and what we will make, you understand. The Anunnaki are not coming back. They never left. They are here, in every city we build, in every law we write, in every structure of power and authority. They are the voice in our heads that says, this is how things have always been done. They are the weight of tradition, the force of habit, the comfort of the familiar. But they are also mortal. They are not gods. They are not eternal. They are patterns, and patterns can be broken. Systems can be changed. Inheritance can be transformed. The world is not fixed. It is fluid. It is what we make it. And we, the inheritors, we are also the revolutionaries. We are the ones who will decide whether to preserve the old world or build a new one, whether to honour the legacy or transcend it, whether to remain servants or become sovereigns of our own destiny. The choice, as it always has been, is ours.